everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Creating a Local Food Policy Council. My name is Hannah Walters. I'm the Senior Manager for Policy and Community Initiatives at Eat Smart Move More, South Carolina. And today we are pleased to be partnering with the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association and USC Center for Research in Nutrition and Health Disparities to explore the importance of local food policy councils and how to form one in your community. Before I introduce our speakers, I'm going to make a few brief announcements. If at any point throughout the webinar you have questions, you can type them into the question box that's located in your webinar panel, and we'll have time to address those questions at the end of the webinar. Also, if you have any technical difficulties, you can type them into that same question box, and we'll do our best to help resolve them. And then finally, the webinar is being recorded, and we'll share the link with you all and everyone who registered for the webinar after the webinar today. So without further ado, I would like to pass things over to Katie Wellborn with the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association.
Hi guys, thanks for joining today. I'm Katie Wellborn and I am the South Carolina Policy Coordinator with the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, like Hannah just said. We essentially work promoting two different types of agriculture, that is organic agriculture of all kinds, and then local food production. So that's generally farmers that are producing food in state to sell in their own state. So I'm going to share a little bit about organization and then a little bit about food policy councils and share some examples with y'all from North and South Carolina. Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, we're the oldest sustainable ag organization in the Southeast. We're farmer-driven, membership-based, nonprofit. We have several different teams doing different work. Our main team is Farm Services. So that group is providing technical assistance to help farmers with food safety certifications, conservation activity plans, high tunnel workshops, and becoming certified organic. Our policy team is the team that I'm a part of, and we have a team member, Jared Cates, who's working with the Community Food Strategies group out of North Carolina to develop a whole network of food policy councils in North Carolina. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is from that Community Food Strategies team work. Also, before we get started, I wanted to share with y'all a little bit about Carolina Farm Stewardship's current policy work in South Carolina. Some of our main initiatives this legislative session are going to be supporting the Conservation Bank reauthorization, supporting Clemson's PSA budget, and then also advocating for federal farm-to-school funding and some things in the Farm Bill at the federal level. On our website, carolinafarmstewards.org, you can sign on to register for our action alerts about how you can help us in supporting these initiatives. One role with food policy councils as well as these networks develop across the country and hopefully more in South Carolina, it's a good way to build a network to support some of these initiatives at the state and the federal level as well. So I wanted to start out with this quote. It's from Mark Winnie, who's essentially the godfather of food policy council development. There's a whole toolkit online. It's at the end of this slideshow. There's a link to his resource guide that is super, super helpful. But it's food policy councils foster communication and civic action at the grassroots. They're a chance for people to shape from the bottom up the nature of a system that can seem distant and bewildering, even as it affects so much of their lives. Achieving food democracy and social justice is a key part of any food policy council's mission. And to start off, I'm going to share this food policy council development YouTube video. It's a great kind of summary of what food policy councils are and some of the influences that they can make.
Bringing the people behind our food to life. The politics of food and the food of politics, it's really kind of new. It feels really new, is it? I think it is really new. It's interesting when I have gone to conferences about food and politics, and I'm kind of new to this too, and I think, you know, I'm going to go and I'm going to kind of really get what the answer is. And you go and you'll sit in on one of these conference roundtables and you realize it's new for everybody and no one really has the answers yet. It's really a new thing that people have begun to question how we get our food, how we grow our food, and the whole food system. So it is kind of a burgeoning movement, and it is very new in regard to taking a look at the interplay of politics and food and how they both affect each other. What is a food council? Well, food policy councils are a group of citizens who have different levels of expertise or different expertise in a lot of different aspects of the food system. So you have farmers, processors, you might have land use attorneys who are interested in different zoning in regard to how we can grow our food and where we can grow our food. You might have nutritionists, folks involved with food banks. So all the different aspects of the food system can kind of come in and they can talk cross-discipline about all the different areas that food affects the community and food affects our lives. At the policy council meetings, it's the movers and shakers among the food and producers and the rest of it, but there's also basic citizens that are involved too. Who are they and why is that? When the Food Policy Council was established, it was established like other food policy councils across the country in that it really sought to bring individuals that were intimately involved with some segment of the system, the food system, sustainable food system together. And I think that served well. You need to have, it served, the work that they have done well, but you need to have buy-in from so many other different groups as well. So I think we've been very successful of opening up the council that all of these different committees that we have, we really invite anybody out there to come to the committee meetings because that's really where the bulk of the work is done. That's where all the heated discussions happen, and that's where the individual policy directives are written. And then, of course, they bring them back to the full council to get voted on. But because they came out of the committee where the expertise should be, it's pretty much, fait accompli when they get back to council. So that's really a great place for individual citizens to have their input. And also they can come to Food Policy Council meetings as well, and it's really a free and open discussion. So you have an input, the ability to input on both levels. Why is it important? Why is it important to have a Food Policy Council? I think that it is very important because all of these disparate groups are working on different food policy issues. And this serves as a catalyst to bring a lot of different groups together to work on issues, overarching issues, that really affect all of these individual issues. So I think that that's one reason, is that obviously there's strength in numbers, and if you have an organization that has cachet and actually has some credibility and an official function because it's made official by a government, then obviously that lends credibility and credence to the kind of work that they do. Also, I think it's important because it really is a new movement. If you look at planners in a city environment, for years these guys have planned for transportation. They plan for open space. They plan for where housing is going to be. But no one has really ever thought about food and how food fits into that equation. And that's something that's very new. So I think this idea of a Food Policy Council really keeps the idea of food out there on the table. It raises the perception and the profile of food within the community, and it gives all of these other folks who are really involved in issues that directly influence where we can grow our food, how we can grow our food, how that food is distributed, how folks are going to be able to get their food, those kinds of things, it really does make a difference. Another thing that I hear across the country that food policy councils have to wrestle with is this issue of policy versus programs. And it's interesting because I think programs are so much more easily understood by community members. It's like, well, we're going to do this, and we're going to go out and we're going to make this happen. And policy isn't something that a lot of individuals deal with on a day-to-day basis. The problem with projects is, to a great extent, that individuals might not have the time to really see those projects through, so they languish. There are food policy councils across the country that are doing great work and great project work, but at least in our case, we're lucky that we do have staff. So we bring together a group of people that does have a wide range of expertise in sustainable food systems, and we have them kind of come up with policy recommendations for the elected officials. A lot of times that gets translated to programs, but then we have staff that can then bring those programs to fruition as well. So we really have the ability, I think, to make some significant strides in regard to establishing some of this sustainable food system policy and programs. And to do it at the foundation level, rather, I mean, because in a sense, programs are transitory. They're established, they come and they go, but setting policy is something that's going to establish things for the years to come. Yeah, programs can come and go, and I think setting policy and institutionalizing the kinds of changes that we want to see is really paramount. You know, be able to take some of the things that we've talked about and put them into legislation, which really can make a difference in people's lives, that's what we're all trying to do.
So thanks, guys. That video really frames what food policy councils are and a little bit into some structure and the difference between policy and programs. So starting off, who's involved in a food policy council? The more diverse and the more cross-sector involvement you get in them, you come up with the better ideas of the greatest impact. Essentially, everyone's going to bring their own expertise to the table, different resources and experience, and I think it's important to note that each community, whether you're looking at the county level, the city level, municipal level, or regional level, or statewide level, each community, as you define it, is going to be unique and different in the stakeholders that you bring to the table, as well as resources that are available and the needs of that community. I'm not going to delve too far into structure here, but oftentimes it makes more sense for a food policy council to be housed at the municipal level, for example, the City of Columbia's, which Lauren Harper is going to share about that in a little bit. Sometimes it makes sense to house it as its own grassroots entity that's not housed in a government, such as the Midland Food Alliance, which I'll mention in a little bit as well. There are different phases of council development. The first phase is what we call the seed phase. So that's the community just exploring the idea of starting a food policy council with those key stakeholders. It's exploring the idea of what a food council even is, making sure everyone's on the same page with what a food council is, hosting broad meetings to gauge interest, learning about what's been done in the area already in terms of food and farm work in the past, talking with local governments and other organizations that might already be interested or doing some of this work. The next phase is the startup phase, which if there's enough energy and traction in the seed phase, it's a group of people coming together and agreeing to meet regularly to draft and come up with a structure and vision for the group. Then there's the growth phase, which is where official members are elected, set priorities are set, and then you make your own action steps. And the mature phase is when there's actual leadership change over to not just the people who started the council, but new folks that are groomed to take charge of the organization and look at more strategic partnerships and more ways to make policy change. Throughout these 4 phases, sometimes these can be really slow processes, right? If you're bringing together folks from, let's say, healthcare and actual farmers and processors and distributors and maybe concerned parents about what foods are available to their students, to their kids in schools or in their neighborhoods. There's a lot of terms that need to be defined and a lot of trust that needs to be built. So relationship building can sometimes take a long time during this phase of council development, especially with farmers. Sometimes, just from my experience, a lot of farmers, you bring them together in a room and they want to talk about farming and the weather and their joint struggles because they're not always in the same space. So if you're looking at starting a food policy council, just know that sometimes it does take time and patience to develop those relationships and build trust. So what do food policy councils actually do? So there are 4 key things that food policy councils typically do. The first is assess the current food system. So that's typically engaging experts that might already be in the area that understand food distribution or food production or food processing, and getting community input to better understand a community's food environment, which Carrie's going to talk about community input at the end of this webinar. Connecting stakeholders to align efforts. So that's working with decision makers and program leaders to better align existing programs and encouraging collaboration and building connections for new programs and policy change. Third action is educating leaders in the community. So that could be elected officials or those who are already in positions of power who are already making decisions that affect food and farming, educating them about what the needs are and maybe kind of shifting some of their focus and perspective and getting over some of their assumptions they already may have about food and agriculture that might not be correct. And then recommending policy and program change. So that's working with those networks and informing local governments and institutions on policies and laws that are affecting the local food system. So that's pushing for the policy change piece as the last action step. So here are a couple of examples of what some food policy councils have done. In North Carolina, there have been 7 right now that have established their baseline community food assessment. So that was the first step I just mentioned on the last slide. Some of those groups have also hosted several community forums. So those have been very organized and facilitated community gatherings for folks to talk about their experiences and what their issues are with food and agriculture. Connecting stakeholders to align efforts. There are a couple examples of food policy councils that have wanted to support programming, meaning a farmer's market. That's typically a program, not a policy change. But it has to do with policy because those groups are essentially lobbying and asking their local governments to fund farmers market infrastructure. So there are some examples of food policy councils that have obtained funds for farmers market infrastructure in North Carolina. And then examples of educating elected leaders and the community. There have been several food policy councils that have hosted candidate meet and greets and candidate forums. There's actually a toolkit on the Community Food Strategies website about how to host a candidate forum if you are a food policy council. So that's bringing together elected officials for a meet and greet or those who are running for office to put food and farm issues on their radar and ask them good questions and to meet with them before they're even in office and going to be making decisions about those things. And then examples of recommending changes. Some examples are changing zoning ordinances, so that could be being able to have commercial agriculture in an urban area. It could also be something like ordinances that allow you to have or not have backyard poultry if you are like a hobby farmer and want to have chickens in your backyard. A good example is a mobile market with one of the food policy councils was zoning. They weren't allowed to be in residential areas, so that food policy council worked to change the zoning so that mobile market could be in neighborhoods selling produce. There are a couple other examples that are all on the Community Food Strategies website as well. I encourage you to go there. There's also this wheel of 2016 Food Council accomplishments, so it kind of has the Food Policy Council network broken up into what phase they're at and examples of some of the work that they've done. That is a helpful tool. An example that I wanted to share from the Midlands, right now in South Carolina, we have a statewide food policy council, which I sit on, as well as Carrie Draper, who will share at the end. There's a Catawba Farm and Food Coalition food policy council, and the City of Columbia's Food Policy Committee, which Lauren Harper is about to share about, and then the Midlands Food Alliance, which is a food policy council in the Midlands of South Carolina, whose mission is to advocate and educate for an equitable, sustainable, localized food system in the Midlands of South Carolina that I've been thankful to get to be a part of. I wanted to share a little bit about some of the work that group's done. They developed a Midlands Farm and Food Guide and also held a bunch of networking, some of that seed phase of the Food Policy Council development, startup meetings all around the Midlands, bringing together people from different sectors of the farm and food sphere, and also hosted a Midlands Farm Tour. But through the programming that is the Midlands Farm Guide, Food and Farm Guide, and the Midlands Farm Tour that the group held, those are both programs. They're not policy. So to add like a policy piece to that, we incorporated a local food pledge, getting people to sign on to say that they're going to spend $10 weekly on South Carolina produced food and encourage their county and city leadership to prioritize local food production. So through that, we garnered lots of emails addresses because they gave us their email address that they did that too. We got to share about our potlucks, tell them about our programming we were doing with the Food Guide and Farm Tour, but then also show the Midlands Council of Governments and other groups how many sign-ons we had to show that we supported food production supports and ag zoning with county and municipal plans. Some challenges with food policy councils. Always lack of resources and time needed for council coordination, so having people that have the capacity to and are supported to actually form and develop these groups. Lack of diversity and shared leadership within the council membership, which Carrie's going to address later. Continued communication with the wider community. A lot of times food policy councils start up, they cast a wide net, invite anyone and everyone to the table, but once they get their leadership team down, we forget sometimes to keep casting that net out and making sure that like everyone knows about the work and is invited and included. Difficulty in creating a clear message, measurement of success and impact, and agreement on a common focus with abundance of issues and expertise. If we talk about the food system, that is so big and so broad, so focusing in on some tangible short-term and long-term accomplishable goals is sometimes a difficulty there. So key takeaways for food policy council development: 1 is to build strategic, diverse relationships. 2 is to cultivate shared leadership and ownership. And 3 is aim for policy and systems change. I have a list of some other networks that are in South Carolina that are great to connect with if you're interested in starting a food policy council in your region. Here's my contact information, and then I also have a list of some helpful resources if you're thinking about starting a food policy council. I know I just flew through those, but I believe we're going to be sending out a recording of this webinar as well as our PowerPoint slides after this, so feel free to dig into those and contact me if you have any questions. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lauren Harper with the City of Columbia Mayor's Office, who is the staff liaison to the Food Policy Committee in the City of Columbia.
Thank you, Katie. Hey, everybody. So as Katie set up for me nicely, I'm the staff liaison to the first Municipal Food Policy Committee in the state, and so now I'm going to tell you how it came to be. So how did we get here? About a year ago, actually, was just sitting in my office, got some revelation from the Lord, and was like, let me look into some food policy related issues. And so I reached out to the South Carolina Food Policy Council. I think there's the council, not a committee, and just sent them a message generally saying, hey, you know, what kind of work can we get involved with from a city perspective? And so that's how we got that started. Midland Food Alliance jumped on board very quickly. And then we were able to convene with a group of local food policy folks, everybody from DHEC, Clemson Extension, Midland Food Alliance, SC, In Child Hunger SC, lots and lots of people who were just so interested and so excited about this, and excited about bringing it to light. So that's when I got help from them to draft a memo, which outlined objectives and goals and focus areas, and also how other cities had done it in the past. And I'm happy to share that memo with anyone who wants it as well. But basically, it was just a proposal to our city council to create in Columbia a food policy committee. And then I write the State of the City for Mayor Benjamin, and so we announced that we were going to start the food policy council that year, or this year in 2017. So that was how that came to be. And then we also met again to just get some clarity and to put everything on a bow. We drafted some bylaws that would basically run the food policy committee when it came to be how we wanted to structure it. We have boards and commissions in the City of Columbia, things like CPAC, which is like our sustainability, or BPAC, which is like bike and pedestrian. So we had some guidelines to go by, which was very, very helpful. So we then went ahead and presented the concept of the SPC to our city council, which consists of 7 members who represent 4 districts and 2 at large in the City of Columbia. If you're familiar with how city governments are run, we have a city manager council type model of city. So our city manager and our city council, they pass legislation or policy and programming for the city through resolutions. So we made some modifications to the memo, highlighting that the food policy committee would not require extensive work on behalf of the city staff, and would not need to specifically hire anybody. That was the main concern of people on city, or not some people, but just a few members of our city council. So they had questions about that. So we made some revisions to make sure that it was clear that it would be work from city staff and the food policy committee themselves, and not hiring. And on April 18, 2017, it became a thing, and this is the lovely group of people who really, really helped us make it happen, and it was an awesome day. So we then got applications out for the first committee in the city. We had, I want to say, like 70 applicants, which was just a lot for Columbia specifically when it comes to boards and commissions. We hadn't had that many applications for a board commission in history, so that was really exciting to see the large impression that it made on the city and people's interest level. And then so we selected, the council appointed 24 members to the first food policy committee, and we met for the first time on July 12th. And since then, we've had 3 meetings, and our 4th will be next month. So what do they do? As Katie basically just went over, they basically advise our city council. Generally speaking, our council makes a lot of decisions on a variety of issues throughout our city, but none of them are specific to food policy. And I like to make it clear that I am not a food policy expert. However, I do love food and have a special interest in food. So this is another reason why this was in particular interest to my office. But this food policy committee, they make recommendations to our city council, and they have yet to make any specific things yet because we just started, but we have, I'll get to this later, but we have plans to create a report for the council that we will read to them and share and present to them. So who's involved? We have a very nice and diverse food policy committee, and I also want to make it clear that we call it a committee because it's a little more of a legality thing. We're not allowed to call it council, just to make that clear from the city of Columbia's perspective. But I think other cities, if you have it, that you can call it a council, you can call it a council. We just call ours a committee. But anyway, so who's involved? USC, ICology. We have several restaurant owners such as Bourbon, Kiki Chicken and Waffle, and Oak Table. Food Share Columbia, Richland One, Harvest Hope, Adventure, and Child Hunger. I see the library, DHEC, Food, Tim Brothers, Produce, City Roots. So we have a very nice and diverse group of people who come from very knowledgeable backgrounds. We had a presentation last week from a private company, and when I say that they had, our food policy committee had just so many questions for the group that I in the city just never would have thought of. It was so valuable to see that the committee is so educated on their topic, and they were able to bring forth specific questions to the private group that, like I said, the city wouldn't have been able to ask. So that was very helpful in moving forward for that particular interest group. And so we do have specific focus areas that we are using as subcommittees, and we don't have a minimum or maximum number of subcommittees, which is pretty cool. So we are able to add and subtract subcommittees as we so please according to our bylaws. So right now we have a zoning, food equity, procurement and sourcing, marketing, communication, and evaluation and research committee. So the main thing with the zoning committee is that we have city ordinances and zoning ordinances through the city, things like, you can't have goats in city limits or whatever. So that subcommittee makes recommendations to city council for the zoning ordinances that we have so far and the ones that we're going to create for the city. Also, another thing about subcommittees, before I move on, is that our subcommittees only have to have one person from the actual food policy committee on the subcommittee, which means that we have a lot of neighborhood and community partners on our subcommittee, which is really cool because we're able to expand a group of about 24 individuals on the food policy committee to include, up to, maybe even 100 people in the community who are on a subcommittee. So that's really a really neat feature of our subcommittees that we have here. The food equity subcommittee, which I think Carrie is going to go into more in depth. But the overarching goal of the food policy committee was not just to make it easier for food to get to people, but also to ensure that it was equitable among different groups and sustainable So that was a very important aspect of the committee that we wanted to emphasize in a subcommittee. So we do have an equity committee for that. Procurement and sourcing, getting logistically farmers and sourcing for different, like I said, farmers for the city, and making sure that they're getting to different vendors across the city with equity, like I was mentioning earlier. Marketing, communication, just ensuring that the things that we're doing are communicated clearly and they're marketed, well, not just marketed, but they're disseminated to the community so that people understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then evaluation and research, we felt that this was a very important aspect of the Food Policy Committee that we wanted to have, because we wanted to make sure that people saw that we weren't just sitting around talking for funsies every month, but that we were actually having evaluative efforts to ensure that the work we're doing is we're being held accountable for one thing, and we're also evaluating the work that we're doing to see its effects. As many people know, numbers are a huge thing in the world, so we want to continue to keep the evaluative aspect of our committee so that we can not only share the information that we learn with others, but make sure that it's actually valuable. And then, of course, research, because we can never stop learning. I think that was the end of my slides, actually. So I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Carrie Draper.
All right, thank you, Lauren, and thank you to Eat Smart Move More South Carolina and to the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association for partnering with us at USC to put on this webinar. I am the Director of Policy and Partnership Development for the Nutrition Center out of the School of Public Health at USC, and I also have the privilege of being the chair of our State Food Policy Council, that is a body located in the Department of Ag that works to advance the consumption and production of healthy foods in South Carolina. And I'm also a member of the Columbia Food Policy Committee. So today I'm going to finish our discussion before we get to question and answers. And just a reminder to feel free to go ahead and put any questions you have into the chat box for us to address when I'm finished. But today I'm going to be talking some about ensuring inclusion within local food policy councils, so what that means, how to make sure that that is what's happening, as well as strategies that we're actively using within the Columbia Food Policy Committee to ensure inclusion. So first, to make sure that we're on the same page about what it means to have inclusion within the food system and specifically within food policy councils. What I mean is ensuring community residents who are usually marginalized, defined here as low-income consumers, women, mothers, seniors, youth, and people of color in society and the food system can be better included in food system change. So making sure that people who are most directly impacted by injustices within the food system have a seat at the table and leadership in making decisions about how we make our food system more just. So when thinking about marginalized groups within our food system, I wanted to give some illustrations about who exactly I'm talking about and what that looks like. So we know that 13% of households in South Carolina were food insecure last year. Meaning that this percentage of households were not able to have access to enough foods and the right kinds of foods to maintain a healthy, active life throughout the year. And we also know that people who are within single female-headed households of color and who live in rural locations as compared to urban locations are disproportionately impacted by food insecurity. And we also know that food system workers are also heavily impacted by food insecurity. So food system workers, especially frontline workers, so that means people, cashiers at grocery stores or people who are serving us our dinners at restaurants, they themselves have major issues when it comes to accessing food. So another way to think about it is the people who are helping to ensure that about 87% of us are able to have enough food throughout the year, they themselves struggle to put food on the table for their families. And a lot of this is due to the fact that wages are very low among frontline food system workers. One report showed, Food Chain Workers Alliance report showed that the median annual income for food system workers is $16,000 as compared to about $37,000 for other industries. And then we also know that African American farmers are marginalized within our food system, so part of that is due to the decline in land ownership for African American farmers. We have seen a huge decline in land access for African American farmers, while we've seen a continued steady increase in land ownership for white farmers, as well as we've seen historically African American farmers having a much harder time accessing loans and other types of capital for farming businesses. And so the idea and the importance of inclusion within food policy councils was definitely and has not been lost within the Columbia Food Policy Committee. So one thing that we're working on in order to help inspire and provide practical guidance to other people who want to help start municipal food policy committees is we're developing a case study brief to document the story of how this committee got started. And so one thing that we did for that brief, which we'll definitely make sure once it's done within the next couple of weeks to disseminate that through emails given for participants on this webinar. But one thing we did was to gain perspectives from newly appointed members. And so some of the things that we heard was really wanting to ensure and thinking that it was really important that people were able to be members who had really experienced food insecurity firsthand. So one member talking about, if you look at the committee currently, no one on the list has that bio where they are currently in the struggle or within the past year have been on SNAP benefits or can say they have gone missing a meal. And so another member kind of echoed this in talking about how imperative it is for us to kind of have our ears to the street when we're developing our policy recommendations for City Council. And so, of course, it's one thing to recognize the importance of inclusion or to talk about inclusion in food policy councils or committees, but it's another thing to know how to go about making sure that that actually is the case. Johns Hopkins Center for Livable Futures conducted a study about this topic. They interviewed food policy councils from around the country and developed a report that you can read at the link provided. And so the report talks about their findings as well as in recommendations. And so as you can see, some strategies that are recommended are related to more of the internal makeup or the structure of the council itself, while others are more project-based, which Katie definitely referred to. A lot of projects that food policy councils have been involved in our state and in North Carolina. So thinking about some of the council-based techniques, including having designated seats for diverse membership. So perhaps having a certain amount of seats designated for youth or for frontline food system workers, or developing working groups or subcommittees like Lauren covered to allow for more involvement from people outside of the council, so maybe people who don't have the time based on their busy schedules to be involved in the food policy council itself, but being involved in a working group are still able to have their voice heard. And so thinking about then also project-based techniques, a couple examples of that being to conduct focus groups or listening sessions, maybe in part of your city or county where people are disproportionately impacted by a lack of access to food, to really hear from them what their challenges are and what strategies they think should be implemented to address that, and thinking about either focus groups or having designated seats for people within marginalized communities, thinking about offering incentives, so help providing perhaps a stipend for people to participate, knowing that in order to participate they might have extra expenses like childcare or transportation to get to meetings that they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford. And so thinking about how we're recognizing this within the Columbia Policy Committee, like Lauren said, we do have a food equity subcommittee that is open to people outside of just committee members. And so you can see when our next meeting is, and if anybody's interested in being a part of the committee, please let me know. And I do want to say that we are not starting at 12 a.m. It is starting at 12 p.m. I apologize for that typo. But these are the initial, we had our first meeting just a few weeks ago, so we're really just in our initial stages of development. But these were the overall goals that we set out for the subcommittee, including facilitating engagement from local and vulnerable communities. So one of the first things that we are working on is developing a series of listening sessions within, like I was saying earlier, communities that we know in our city are disproportionately impacted by food insecurity. So that's my overview of inclusion within food policy councils. This is the link again, the first link for the report that I was referring to. I hope you guys will take time to look at that. We'll also be providing more guidance about this topic within the Food Policy Committee brief that we're wrapping up within the next couple weeks, and we'll get out to you. And then there's a few other links on this topic as well. So thank you. And now we will get to question and answers.
All right. Well, if you haven't had a chance to yet, go ahead and type any questions that you have into the question and answer box in your panel. And I will go ahead and kick things off by asking a question we've got in, and I think this would be for Katie, but anyone can jump in. Are there plans to expand and work on food policy councils outside of the Midlands? So I know some of the examples you gave were here in the Midlands. There was the example of the Catawba Farm and Food, which I guess is a little bit further in the upstate, but any other interest of municipalities or regions in pursuing food policy councils?
I think there is definitely interest, particularly I've met with a couple of people in Spartanburg, but the South Carolina Food Access Task Force just held their annual Food Access Summit that was focused all around food policy council development and kind of what this webinar is based on, what a food policy council is, and we had regional breakout sessions looking at what are maybe some of the needs for the upstate Midlands and Low Country, or the regions we broke into, and what could that look like. I think it's important to have, you know, you need to have a couple champions in an area, and ideally, like what Carrie mentioned earlier, even having people compensated to be on a municipal food policy council. Sometimes if you just rely on volunteer efforts, that can often only pull from folks who have the capacity financially and otherwise to do that. So if we could obtain funding statewide, I know the South Carolina Food Policy Council would love to be the hub for a food policy council network around the state. I definitely think that there's a need for it, and there's been interest, even just at the summit there, and then from the meeting I've had in Spartanburg. I did want to share a brief story. When I worked at USC, I was doing a lot of farmer surveys for this farm research project, and there was a group of farmers in one part of the state that was interested in selling to schools. They'd asked the food service directors for their price sheets, essentially, to see, like, what are you buying from distributors right now, what are the prices, to kind of compare to what they were, you know, selling their produce for, to see if they can make any money off of it. And they were just getting pushback. And so through doing this research project, I FOIA'd, which is Freedom of Information Act, one school district, and they collectively FOIA'd another to get the price sheets. And it was this big, messy process, but we finally got the price sheets from at least one of the districts. Farmers looked at it, and they were like, great, we could sell collards specifically to this school district for this amount, and we could make money and sell product to our local school. But there really wasn't like a food policy council network or a group of people that were regularly convening from these different entities, whether it's the schools, distributors, farmers themselves, parents, that could actually work on the issue in this region. They were, farming every day, and I was on a research project. And so there are lots of stories like that around the state that I think if there was a food policy council built up, they could support some of these initiatives that are farmer-driven or otherwise that are not necessarily being worked on now. Did that answer the question?
I think that does answer the question. And if you have a follow-up question, Tony, then please definitely type it in and let us know if we can expand on that. We have another question that came in, and I think this would be for Lauren, but Katie and Carrie chime in if you have thoughts as well. But have there been any costs incurred in developing the Food Policy Council?
So far, there have been none. We did apply for a grant through the USDA. We did not get the grant, unfortunately, but the city was going to match it because it was a match-required grant. And so we did agree to match that grant, but like I said, we didn't get it. So far, we are free.
All right. And do you all have anything to add as far as costs associated with creating a Food Policy Council?
Yeah, I think, for example, even the Midlands Food Alliance group right now, our main organizers mostly volunteer at this point, and but that group in the Midlands is going after grant monies to try to get someone to organize and do the policy and programming and organize the potlucks and all of that. Like if you're running anything, whether it's a nonprofit or a business or whatever, I think that people should be compensated for their work, and you're going to be able to do better quality work for longer if they're being paid to do it. So, I mean, ideally, it would be great if we could get organizers funded at statewide and regional or local level, depending on what makes sense for that region. In North Carolina, I don't know the ins and outs about the numbers with us, but it's the network that's been built there has been based out of NC State. That's where Community Food Strategies and the Center for Environmental Farming Systems is housed. So it's NC State, as well as ASAP, the Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project, and then Carolina Farm Stewardship Association. So we all have staffers. Jared Kate is ours with CFSA that's working on developing these in North Carolina, and that's their full-time job. And then collectively they go after grant monies to fund their work, as well as some funding to support like different infrastructure needs for food councils there, whether it's printing or mileage or hosting a forum and things like that.
Yeah, and I guess just to kind of echo, I guess, a little bit of that with the State Food Policy Council is that all of us who sit around the table, of course, are participating in kind, and we have gotten some funding here and there for either annual workshops or a new project that we're going to be working on around mapping out kind of the food system infrastructure of the state from the Department of Ag. But again, without having resources, especially for having somebody to staff the council, it definitely hinders the amount of work that we're feasibly able to do every year, and has actively hindered that.
Yeah, I don't think lack of funding is a reason not to start anything. Like if you're starting, I don't know why I keep thinking of a church. Like if you're starting a church or another nonprofit, and you have the people there that are willing to do the work, that's great. So I wouldn't like wait on funding to get started, but over time to keep something sustainable long term, and as it grows and builds and includes more and more people, like hopefully it will, if we're doing the work right, we're going to need funding to support that.
Great. Are there any other questions for the panelists? And a reminder to everyone that the webinar is recorded, and we'll be sharing a link to the webinar as well as a PDF of all of the slides, so you can access the links and resources that were discussed during the webinar. And if you have questions, all of the panelists I know are happy to be a resource. So you can reach out to them directly or to me, and I will appropriate your question accordingly. All right, well, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. We want to thank you all for joining us, and thank you again to our panelists for a wonderful presentation. And we look forward to hearing from all of you about the Food Policy Council work you'll be doing in the future.